Hello. Welcome to the first Spotlight on Consumer live webinar. My name is Samad Masood, Content and Strategy Marketing Lead for the Infosys Knowledge Institute. I'm joining you live from my home in London to moderate today's discussion. I'll be talking with three highly experienced executives from our consumer goods, retail, and logistics practice. First, Andrew Hoganson, Global Managing Partner with Infosys Consulting. Andrew is joining us from Seattle, Washington. Also, we have Indu Ponappan, Industry Principal with Infosys, joining us from Trivandrum, India. And finally, Ezil Mani, Associate Vice President, Retail Store Transformations with Infosys, joining us live from Frisco, Texas. If you have any questions during the discussion, please post them in the chat. We'll have some time to answer them at the end. But for now, I'll get started. So we're all familiar with what 2020 did for consumer industries. We all experienced it ourselves. Digital was accelerated, as was home delivery and direct sales. Companies lived or died by their ability to adapt. But as the pandemic subsides, consumer-facing industries once again need to completely rebuild themselves in 2021. Andrew, as we head out of the pandemic, how do you feel things are going to change for consumer packaged goods, retail and logistics companies?
Thanks, Samad. Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That's the one that we've all been talking about for some time now. How do things change? And realistically, I like to think of it in three buckets. What are those things that are going to persist or stay the way they were and continue post-pandemic? Which things are going to revert back to the way they were before the pandemic? And what new things will evolve out of this? So if we think about that, right, a good example of something that we all feel pretty strongly is going to persist or going to continue to grow is the move of consumers to online shopping, right? People have gotten a taste for the convenience. They've gotten used to the fact that they know how to manipulate and go online and get the visibility to all the products, the breadth of assortment, transparency of pricing. So we really see that continuing, that shift to online. In terms of behaviors that we think might revert, well, clearly one of those is social behaviors, right? So going out to restaurants, to theaters, going to concerts. So all those activities that involve consumerism around social activities, gatherings, et cetera, we'll definitely see a strong move back to that. And in terms of things that might evolve or come out of this, clearly one of the things we're seeing is a lot more innovation in the supply chain and logistics space. So based on this demand for convenience, this demand for speed, we see a lot of the consumer goods and retail companies investing heavily in automation, whether that's things like robotics in their distribution centers, in home delivery capabilities. So really to satisfy that consumer expectation and that consumer need for speed, for convenience, and for products that are available to them when they want them, where they want them. So that's my perspective on how I see things post-pandemic.
Great. And you say that e-commerce is the thing that will persist, but it's doing more than persisting, isn't it? It's started to really dominate the market, and 2020 seemed to be a year in which e-commerce was finally tipped over that point in which it becomes the main way people are engaging. They were forced to engage with retail, and how does that affect the supply chain? Indu, I'd like to ask you, what sort of changes do you see given you work in that area?
You're absolutely right, Samad. E-commerce is not just persisting, but it is rapidly transforming. Andrew spoke about convenience to shoppers online. That is exactly it. Retailers and brands are providing newer ways to shop, more delightful ways to shop. And this has sort of brought in the kind of collaboration that we never thought was possible before. Collaboration between public and private sectors, for example. I was recently reading a survey which said millennial consumers are willing to spend up to 30% premium for guaranteed same-day deliveries. So this high level of convenience that is offered to the customers, the retailers and brands have to meet them. And the need to meet this high level of convenience has brought the whole supply chain process to the forefront. Express deliveries, now people call them light speed deliveries. These need the order fulfillments to be quicker, the order traceability to be more accurate, and every other consumer wants real-time update on their orders. This entire process of getting a product to the hands of the consumer is changing. Manufacturers, warehouses, retailers, brands, each of them are looking at the supply chain process, the supply chain operations in a holistic perspective, starting from the purchase order visibility. And it is very exciting for us to observe most of our clients across the value chain adopt AI and ML as more of a necessity than an option for supply chain operations. And this includes their need to have more predictive, proactive, and better responsive systems in place for possible disruptions. So, yes, it is changing a lot.
Interesting. And it sounds that actually the connectivity between different organizations, different parts of the supply chain, so the CPG providers, the retailers, the logistics, the different levels of logistics providers, there's also that element, isn't there? It's sort of being able to have visibility, but visibility across many different partners. And I assume some of those partners, based on, Andrew, what you're saying, and Indu, those partners have changed quite significantly over 2020 because of the need to react and do things that maybe these organizations weren't comfortable with previously or weren't ready to do. Anyone have any views on that kind of new balance of partnerships and the new ecosystem of sharing that's starting to emerge?
Yeah, this is Andy. I'll jump in on that. So I think in terms of the ability to both respond to events that are going to happen, like the pandemic, as well as respond to the evolving consumer expectations and needs for light speed delivery. I love that phrase, by the way. I'm gonna hang on to that one. It's not something that that CPG companies or retail companies can do in isolation by themselves. So what we are seeing is a higher degree of connectivity between those players, and not just one-to-one relationships, but we're seeing an evolution of marketplaces, right? Where data and information shared on-hand inventories, data and information shared on demand, positioning of product, right? And planning, right? Planning now extends beyond the four walls of an organization to encompass their partners in those plans, right? This concept of integrated business planning that's been around for a while is really rising to the surface, and we see that accelerating now, given the need to really make sure that we're partnering and planning in conjunction with our partners in order to meet those expectations and meet the needs of the consumers going forward. So data sharing, information sharing. And the other thing, I think, beyond just information, beyond just planning, I really see that there starts to be more of a pooling of inventories, right? Where we're seeing consumer goods companies and retailers share inventory in order to satisfy the consumer demand. So maybe one company gets an order for a product that they don't have the inventory available to fulfill, or maybe it's not in the right location, yet one of their partners has that available, and they're sharing that demand with that partner in order to fulfill that. That really comes down to keeping the brand promise, which is really what's important a lot of these days, is fulfilling that brand promise versus capturing necessarily that one sale. So these types of relationships between consumer goods and retailers, and as I said, not just one-to-one, but really starting to see an evolution in the marketplaces where multiple retailers or multiple consumer goods manufacturers are working in conjunction to provide a better consumer experience.
Thanks, Andrew. It sounds incredibly complicated and a challenge that I suppose the industry has been looking at for a while, but now is really forced into. Ezel, I wonder if you have any comments specifically on on what Andrew was saying there about that new complexity. But I also understand that you and I have privately spoken about this before, that it's not just delivery, isn't it? There's the whole returns. As e-commerce grows, the returns are also becoming a massive burden, and I suppose that adds another layer of complexity into how these partnerships work together.
Absolutely, Samad. I think the complexity of returns is a very big problem for the industry right now. I will give you some stats. Right, NRF announced that the prediction for 2021 retail is going to grow somewhere between 6.5 to 8.2% to a $4.3 trillion. And as we saw in 2020, $790 billion worth of e-commerce orders have been placed by all the consumers in America, and out of which about 10.5% of them have gone through return. Let me put this: for every $10 you sold, you are getting $1 back as a return. That's a nightmare we are dealing with. The reverse logistics are extremely complex. A product which is returned by a consumer, a study shows that on an average, about 7 associates are touching that product before that product is either destroyed or whether it is ready for resale. Think about it, 7 associates. And that's a problem with this industry is facing. I think Indu touched upon AI becoming a necessity. Let me tell you this. If we can use AI and machine learning to identify what the consumer is going to buy the next, why can't we use the same AI and ML to identify what the consumer is going to return and stop that return? Because every one return you save, it's going to be a direct bottom line and a top line to the company. And that's the where I think the return challenges have to be addressed by the retailers. Now let's last but not least, using blacklisting of consumers for returns, or having a difficult return process, that's going to be counterproductive, because you don't want the consumers to move away from you because you have a very difficult return policy. You want to make the returns very easy for them. At the same time, you want to make sure that we give the right product to them, and so that they don't return it. For example, providing the right product information, the right images, the right size, the right fitment, all these informations made available to the consumer, and use the AI/ML to identify which is likely to be returned. And that way, I think the retail industry can get around the problem of returns.
Thank you, Azul. Indu, I wanted to ask you, because and skipping ahead a bit, I wanted to ask you. Andrew mentioned about the brand promise. Ezel mentioned about this, getting the data right, sending the right thing. I mean, it's interesting to see that the roles of CPG, retail, and logistics organizations are sort of evolving in away from what they were maybe most comfortable doing historically, and now last mile logistics companies are becoming more and more the face of these brands. How do you feel that logistics has to change to sort of take on this role?
Yeah. So 3 years ago, when I was doing a study on last mile logistics, many articles predicted that last mile exchange is a big thing. It is going to be the strategic solution for speedy e-com deliveries. But now the need is much more than speed. The consumer today has few, even earlier, they had few things about a last mile delivery as an expectations. On time, in full, no error, and now no contact is also added. The past year has brought in a lot of conscious changes around sustainability and fuel consumption, about what you said about delivery staff, which is drivers or associates who are doing the deliveries, becoming the brand ambassadors of the logos that they carry. They even become salesmen of the products that they carry. And then there is this point that Adriel mentioned about reverse logistics. There is a blending that we see of reverse logistics and last mile because of so much of returns that are happening. And all the points that he mentioned about AI and ML being very relevant is spot on. So what all these point to is about significant investments that last mile companies are making and will have to make. Few things where investments would be seen are fleet upgrade. A lot of companies are investing in electric fleet, including electric two-wheelers for short distance, small package deliveries. Then training the delivery staff. They are more than just drivers or people who just drop in a product. They have to be made aware of the product. They have to be made the face of the product to the end consumer. They have to be apprised of what the product is and answer any queries where possible. So that itself is an investment. Then robotics and automation, unmanned packing stations, unmanned drop spots and pickup spots. And we have also seen local pickup and delivery increasing. That is another thing that would have to have an investment in terms of so platforms that can utilize social or crowdsourcing for logistics, for last mile logistics specifically. And then, of course, autonomous vehicles have been the talk of the town for a long time. So definitely, there are going to be significant investments that last mile logistics companies are going to do in the coming years. And as of now, it is said that only 20 to 30% of the last mile deliveries are in fact done through carriers. The rest are done by the brands and the retailers. So definitely to make sure that the space is utilized and services are provided with the changing norms, last mile companies will definitely have to invest.
Thanks, Indu. It's fascinating to think that the logistics, the last mile logistics, is really becoming something that I guess what we're saying is has to be highly technological, using AI and ML, platformatizing it, using social media, crowdsourcing, etc. But it also has to have a kind of community and brand aspect, doesn't it? I see, we've all seen more and more local delivery people that we start recognizing in our neighborhood. Delivery people have started to become famous on YouTube, and whether they're good or bad, depending on what they've done to your boxes. And it's starting to actually put the logistics firms really at the forefront and seen as that sort of essential service. So I suppose that their brand has been uplifted, but it's interesting you're saying that there's still 20 to 30% of that last mile that's being done by the actual brands. I wonder, Andrew, Ezel, what do you fancy the chances of CPG firms and retailers being able to wrestle some of that back, or should they be working closer with the logistics firms to give them the right to own that brand and take that forward? How do you see this panning out?
Yeah, I would say a couple of quick thoughts on that, right? I think, first of all, it is about meeting the brand promise, as I said earlier. And I think to the point that Indu raised, it's about that last mile and how you get that. I think the brands are investing in figuring out ways to get that product to the consumer. Now, we've talked a lot about the last mile, right? And how that delivery driver becomes a brand ambassador. I think beyond just that last mile, though, we also need to think about where the product itself is. So a lot of what we're seeing is micro fulfillment centers, right? We've often talked, obviously, about dark stores and things like that. So I think the brands are getting more invested in how do we position that product closer, make it easier for those delivery companies, the logistics providers, to get that product to the consumer. So I do think they are investing in that. I think they're becoming a part of the answer for how to make sure that they're meeting those expectations about same day, in full, not damaged, all of those good things. But yeah, I would say that they definitely are playing a role in that as far as goes getting the product closer to the consumer, as well as predicting that demand, right? That's the other part of this. I mentioned earlier a shared planning experience between the logistics companies and the CPG companies and the retailers. And the more we can predict what that demand looks like, we can staff up for it. We can prepare for it in sort centers. We can prepare for it in terms of how many delivery drivers we have. So I think they really are stepping up their role in working in conjunction with the logistics providers to meet that brand promise, to meet that consumer expectation.
Yeah, and I would like to correct a point here where I was saying about the percentage carried by the pure logistics carriers, the 3PL carriers perhaps for last mile, and by the brands and retailers. The brands and retailers are still doing most of it. The higher percentages with them. And we have also seen this, the rising trend that they're trying to use the local delivery models, not the big players in the market, but the local delivery models and the smaller companies, the smaller enterprises that are local, and having partnerships with them to get the last mile deliveries done. And these kind of partnerships are on the rise. And we have seen a lot of these come up in Asia Pacific, not just by retailers and brands, but also by CPG companies, where they are promoting direct to consumer. And they don't want to be tied up with the retailer. So that is another trend that we have seen.
Great. Ezel, I think you had a point to add as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Indu and Andu said is absolutely right. But I am seeing some of my clients getting very creative in this space, especially the brands and the retailers. They are now creating platforms. Those platforms will help them in terms of identifying which is the partner who can deliver this particular product to the consumer the fastest and the cheapest. Think about a scenario. I have one of my client who is delivering the Slurpee drinks, and they need to get that drink in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes to the consumer, because otherwise the product is going to be not any more colder for the consumer to consume. So they have a simple mechanism to go and identify whether should I send it through DoorDash, should I send it through Uber Eats, should I send it through any other faster service, which is cheapest, which is fastest. They have kind of a creating a marketplace for these logistics companies to come and tell them that who can deliver the fastest. And that's the way the technology has been placed to connect the dots and make sure that the product reaches the consumer fastest and the cheapest.
If I can jump in for just a second here. We've talked a lot about e-commerce, right? Because clearly that's where a lot of the attention is the volumes we see shifting to e-commerce. The one thing we can't lose sight of is as we come out of the pandemic, right, as we reach that herd immunity point, consumers are going to venture out, right? They are going to want to go back out and shop and go to a restaurant for lunch. And so one of the things we see happening a lot now is how do we mirror that convenience of the e-commerce experience in the in-store environment? And so back to some of the things I was saying earlier, right? Micro fulfillment centers, pop-up stores, right? How do I get my product closer to the consumer at the time when they want it? How do I create a store that has an endless aisle so that I always have everything the consumer wants, right? We know when we go online, I have the ability to search for a product, find it, get transparency on the price, order it, and have it delivered to my home. How do I replicate that in store? Well, I have, a thin layer of inventory that consumers can touch and feel and see, but then I have that endless aisle experience, whether it's via kiosks or other devices in the store that expand the inventory available to the consumer from a convenience and an availability perspective. So one of the things we shouldn't lose sight of is when those consumers go back out and start to increase the volume of time they're spending out in store, we need to really think about how do we bring the benefits and the positives of the e-commerce experience into the store as well.
That's right, Andrew. And I think one of the things I'm quite interested in understanding is how this changes the way brands market merchandise, because I suppose over last year they've really had to go through a big change to get used to being online. Before the pandemic, it was well known that many CPG brands wanted to go direct to consumer, and many of them seemed to be dabbling in physical retail as well as online. But I suppose in the last year they've been through a bit of a bit of a tough initiation into really how it works online. What are you seeing in terms of their success rates, or how effective they've been, and what they might have learned? And what do you think brands should be taking as lessons in terms of their strategies to go direct and to go online, and also to complement that with the physical stuff that you were just talking about?
Maybe I will start and then hand it over to Andy.
Sure.
So the think about what currently happening in the market, right? In fact, Walmart launched a TikTok shopping channel, and they have done 2 successful TikTok shopping. And Nordstrom has announced that they are doing a live stream shopping. And this is a new way of these retailers trying to engage with the consumers using live streaming and TikTok as a platform. And then we also saw that during this year, interestingly, the subscription programs also has taken up a very interesting evolution, right? We saw American Airlines launching this wine club for $99 a month, and we saw the Ralph Lauren launching the Lauren look for $125 a month. So new kind of way of engaging with the consumers, which is happening on the subscription model. So the brands and talk about the pop-up stores, right? Nordstrom launched a tonal stores within Nordstrom shop, I think they have about 40 going on right now. And Ulta inside Target, Sephora inside Kohl's. If you look at it, the trend is very, very clear that the brands and the retailers are trying to find the effective way of engaging the consumers. And some of these examples, like the subscription model, the pop-up store, and these live streaming shopping, are becoming a very, very mainstream. And all these retailers are going to be trying that for the rest of the 2021.
Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, if I can, just to add a couple of thoughts, right? So I'd break two parts of the question down. One is how are we reaching the consumer, right? So traditionally, from a marketing and how we reach a consumer, we reached them in the store quite a bit, right? So we had the consumers captive in our stores, and we were able to, whether it's via flat screen, advertising going on in the store, obviously the point of purchase, advertising, et cetera. Now we're finding that that isn't the case. So the question is, how are we reaching them and where are we reaching them? Obviously, a lot is in the home, right? So a lot of the marketing investment is targeting in-home advertising, in-home messaging. And then the second, so one question is, how are we reaching the consumer today and where? The other question is, what's the message, right? Because what we're seeing now is a lot more of the social aspects, green, sustainability, all the diversity, all of that messaging is starting to become more and more important to reach those same consumers. So it's not just about my product, but it's about my brand and what I represent. So I would say, number one, let's think about that aspect and what's going on there. Number two, when we talk about going online, many companies looked at going online as just a matter of getting a website up, having some product available, and being able to ship it. Now we're starting to see a lot of the functions that were traditionally reserved for in-store shifting to the online. Things like merchandising. Companies are having to think more and more about, what does it mean to digitally merchandise my product? Second, we think about product development, right? So the traditional, I get feedback through my customer response, customer service mechanisms, and there's a long, lengthy process to incorporate that back into product sourcing, product development. Well, now we've got this wealth of data coming to us via the online mechanism. How are we using that as a mechanism to feed back into our product design, product development? So all of these things, all these traditional functions that serve the store environment, companies are rethinking, how do I shift that, whether it's my merchandising, my product development, how do I shift that to this digital world? And that really is going to be the key to success for a lot of companies, is how they really evolve, not just having product available, but how they shift their true business functions to serve that digital marketplace much more effectively.
I'll add on to a few things that Andrew said. He was talking about how to engage the consumers, and there are these specialty stores, specialty retailers, maybe luxury fashion, for example, who used to provide the kind of personal attention to the customers based on who visits the stores, and now that is not going to be possible. Earlier, curated catalogs, etc., were a luxury, and that was not followed very diligently. And now, those kind of attention-seeking mechanisms, the way the consumers are made to feel special, are all going to come back very much. And not just that, we also spoke about customer service. Where do you cut down and where do you invest? Do you invest in marketing and cut down on the customer service? And automation, can it be used for customer service in a way in which that can be more of a self-help mechanism than always having to reach out to a human? So those kind of changes definitely have to be consciously made by the retailers too.
Great, thanks, Indu. We talked a bit about marketplaces and about how brands are going to be engaging directly. I wonder if each of you perhaps could go through your focus areas and tell us, what do you think, looking ahead, are the 2 or 3 key things that retailers, brands, or logistics companies need to do in order to get 2021 right? Hazel, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Samad. So here is what I'm thinking. From the grocery and FMCG companies, if you think about it, we already touched upon this lightning delivery, the same day delivery, which is going to become very, very important for them. And I think they will continue to invest more on that. And coming to Instacart like services, where some shopper will be shopping for me, will be a key focus for a FMCG and grocery. Now, if I think about department store, the department stores are going to be focusing more on buy online, pick up in store, and endless aisle, and the slot booking, making sure that the consumer is feeling special, make a reservation, they can come to the store and buy stuff. That's going to be a key focus for the department stores. Now, if I look at high-end fashion experience-driven stores, the focus is going to be more around creating a memorable experience for the consumer, whether it is going to be using features like immersive experiences or experiential stores, these pop-up stores where they are going to be helping them, or some of these live streaming shopping which I talked about earlier. These are the things which are going to be more focused by the high-end and the fashion companies. But overall, it's going to be a great year for retail. I think one of my colleague used a word. There is going to be a revenge shopping happening because the consumers were not able to spend as much as they wanted. Now they have the vaccinations getting rolled out, stimulus check on the way. We are all going to be looking at the revenge shopping by the consumers, and we be all better prepared for that to happen.
Revenge shopping, I like it. Like lightning delivery, revenge shopping. Andrew, the pressure's on for you to come up with something. I'll give you a few minutes to think. Well, Indu, could you answer the same question? So what do you see as the things going forward that logistics firms really need to think about?
Earlier, the consumers knew that somebody who's delivering a product to their doorstep may not really be from the retailer or the brand. But now the expectation is that it is somebody from the brand who's going to take care of my concern as well. So that kind of a training, that is definitely going to be more relevant now, especially when you are delivering high value products. The delivery staff, the drivers need to be aware of it and be prepared, need not be proactive, but be prepared to answer the consumers. Then the partnership I mentioned about. Last mile exchange was something where people thought the retailers and logistics companies would come together to make sure each of their targets are met. Sorry, I went on mute. So each of they thought of coming together to make sure that all the targets are met by collaborating with each other. And such collaboration is now seen in retail as well. There is no more competition, but more of collaboration, at the same time giving up their targets on their revenue targets and their marketing targets. So I do see that there will be a lot more collaborative ways, innovative ways of collaboration that is going to come up.
Great. Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, just two quick points. One, I would say the logistics industry traditionally has had the benefit of a lengthy planning process, right? A lot of lead time to think about where do I position containers, how am I planning my labor and my distribution centers. So they've had the luxury of time and foresight to think about that planning exercise. Now they're getting caught up in this whole next day, same day world, and they're having to figure out how to change that. So one of the things that I'm seeing more is, just to pick on one, distribution centers moving to waveless planning, which is moving away from this concept of I batch downloaded a bunch of orders that have to be delivered over this week, and I'm going to build them into waves that throughout the day I'll process. Now they're shifting to this concept of waveless, where orders are constantly coming in and being reshuffled and queued, and work is dynamically assigned in order to meet that same day, next day demand. So that's one. And then two, an interesting thing that we're starting to pop up is availability of labor, right? So labor shortages is becoming a factor now. Increasing minimum wages is also becoming a factor. So that's driving a need to automate. And we've talked about this a couple of times. Indu referenced packing stations and sort centers and things that are becoming manless or automated. That's something I think we're going to see a lot more of. Obviously, companies like Amazon invested heavily years ago when they made the Kiva acquisition and invested in robotics, but we're now seeing others starting to play catch up in that space as well. So I think when how do we move to a more dynamic, near real-time planning world in the logistics space? And then secondly, where do we look for automation to help buffer against the potential shortage of labor that we see there?
It sounds to me like, we're talking about collaboration and partnership and such, but in reality, this is probably going to go down the route of consolidation with more businesses trying to kind of own more of that journey. Would you agree with that? And if so, who do you think are going to be the winners in this scenario? Or is that a sort of not the right way to be thinking of it? Anyone like to have a go at that?
Yeah, I'll share two thoughts, and then I know the others probably will have. And by the way, I haven't come up with my fancy word yet, so I'm still thinking about that in the back end here. So I would think about this in two ways, right? One way is where they're true partnerships, like we were talking about earlier, where CPG companies and retailers are partnering on meeting the consumer expectation, and that's regardless of who gets that order, the other partner can fulfill it. Where there's a lot more inventory information being shared, a lot more demand information being shared. So that to me is more about a partnership, right? And how do they work together to satisfy the consumer expectation? The other is true acquisition, right? And consolidation. And that's things like where we've seen Amazon make several moves in that area where they want to go more and more and own the logistics experience, own some of the product, own different aspects of that. But even companies like FedEx with their recent acquisition of ShopRunner, right? There's another good example of where they're extending beyond their core competency and saying, we want to own that connect point with the consumer on the website. So I do think you'll see both partnerships, which will involve a much deeper relationship around inventory, around demand, around data and product, as well as acquisitions, where you start to see companies consolidate different aspects of the value chain and own that in order to better service that.
So
Great.
I think I will probably on the same two parts which Andrew mentioned about. I think the partnership is going to become evolving, and you will see more and more of that happening. I think earlier in the call itself, I mentioned about some of these interesting partnerships happening between Sephora and Kohl's and Ulta and Target and Tonal and Nordstrom. These are all very interesting kind of partnerships which we will see evolving, and also with the delivery companies like Deliveroo and Uber Eats and Postmates, that will continue to happen. But on coming to the merger and acquisition, I have a slightly a different point of view. The merger and acquisition, I don't think it is going to be a widespread. The companies are probably some of them will not succeed in this, and they will go out of business and they will close down stores and so on. That will continue to happen. But on the other hand, the companies will probably acquire capabilities and maybe technology assets which is going to differentiate them, and that's a kind of a merger and acquisition we will see. But I don't think we are going to see like two brands merging together. That's my view. If I'm proven wrong, that will be great, but I think that's going to be probably not happening in 2021.
Great, thanks.
I won't disagree with both of them, not entirely, but still, I think we spoke about mergers and acquisitions, but there are these small players, the small and medium enterprises in every locality that might have done very well, has been a trusted partner in that locality. And I've observed that a lot of large logos are trying to acquire them to have that market capitalization there when they cannot reach them through the trusted partner which is there in the locality. That is one thing that I have observed. The other aspect of collaboration that you brought up, Samad, is collaboration is not just working together to deliver something, but also sharing information. I spoke about the purchase order visibility and the whole supply chain being looked upon in a holistic manner by every stakeholder in the supply chain. Now, at present, I don't think the sharing of information is happening seamlessly through the supply chain. And that is more and more getting noticed and acted upon by all the stakeholders in the supply chain. So that level of collaboration is going to definitely catch on.
Great, thanks. I'm going to hand over to a couple of the questions that have been coming up. Oh, I see, Andrew, you mentioned another commenter. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So one other thought that just popped up, right? And one of the things through my career in retail and consumer I've learned is that we often learn things from other industries. And one thing that I think we will see evolve over time, not necessarily in 2021, is what I like to think of as a personal shopper passport. So there, I came up with my phrase. Now I'm good. But when we think about healthcare, right? healthcare is evolving towards this world where we almost have this digital folder that we carry around with data about blood work, lab tests, past hospitalizations, et cetera. So it becomes a profile of that patient that's portable with them wherever they go. And I think in the consumer world, we've seen that CPG companies have tried to get that data in the past from retailers, and now they're getting better access to who are the shoppers, what is the personal experience they're looking for. And so I think something that ultimately could evolve out of this becomes more of a passport that each consumer develops about preferences, about their likes, dislikes, sizing information, et cetera, colors, all different sorts of things, food preferences, travel experiential preferences. That becomes their personal passport that then becomes something that can provide better experiences for them as they go from one brand to another, one retailer to another, et cetera. So I think that's something ultimately that could evolve out of this. Now, obviously, a lot of competitive barriers need to come down to share information into that, but I think that would be an interesting development to see going forward as well.
Andrew, I think certainly that's a very interesting development. And if you look across other industries, there is a big drive in financial services and the government sector about identity, data privacy. All of these sort of issues are being thrown up because of the internet and digital. And it's very interesting to think that perhaps it's commerce, it's going to be retail and CPG and that those consumer industries that may drive that forward. Thank you so much for coming up with a little snappy phrase as well. I might prefer to call it a license to shop, though, given there's revenge shopping. But I think a passport makes it a lot clearer.
That's the British 007 coming out in you.
Of course. I was thinking license to shop, license to revenge shop at lightning speed. But it is very interesting to think that actually the consumer should own that data and share it, and perhaps that makes a lot of issues a lot easier for data sharing as well. I'm going to hand over to some of the questions that we've had online as well, and I wanted to ask, going back to that idea of logistics companies becoming the face of brands, and because Andrew, you mentioned also that. I think it was Ezel perhaps mentioned the talent issue, automation. That's been a recurring theme throughout this. But given that we really do expect there to be more brand recognition on the doorstep of your own house, what can logistics companies or brands and retailers that are working with logistics companies, what can they do to make that more consumer centric, to make that person or that most likely going to be a human rather than a robot, to really represent that brand? Have you guys had any thoughts or any things to say on that?
I would say one quick thought, right? Just one quick thought is we really need to look at feedback mechanisms. I think that's something that's missing today. Yes, there's surveys and there are other things, but I think getting direct feedback from consumers about what they want in that experience, how did that experience go? I found personally through my own experiences where I've had bad experiences where I wanted to provide feedback, or even good, I found it challenging to get that feedback to the right people to be incorporated into changing that experience going forward. So I would say number one is some of these companies need to look at the mechanisms that they have in place to capture better data on that experience, in order then to really look forward and say, how do we design or redesign that experience better going forward? So that would be one step in my mind, is that data collection point.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. That makes a lot of sense. Indu, Ezel, any points?
So, we have seen some of the retailers leveraging their own employees to do the deliveries. We saw this happening at Walmart. On their way back, the employees finishing their shift can deliver a few packages. And then we saw some interesting partnership happening between like Amazon and these garage door companies, where people can even open the garage door and deliver it inside the garage, or even in your trunk of your cars. Those are the kind of things which are going to probably become a little bit more acceptable to customers. And given that if the retailers are using their employees to deliver it, the consumers also will feel a lot more comfortable in accepting deliveries of such one. I think that's a way I think it will be able to change some of these images when it comes to the last mile delivery.
Great. Indu, I suppose given you when you corrected me earlier, you were saying that it's actually logistics firms are doing less of the last mile. If they're going to grow there, I suppose this is going to be a really big thing for them. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and whatever I had to say, it'll already covered most of it. One thing is definitely the store employees now, when there's reduction of store employees, they partnering and becoming the face of the store or the branch to the end consumers. And the other one is dedicated partnerships where they can train. It is not practical to keep training every other carrier who comes in to go ahead and represent the brand. So instead of that, why not have a dedicated partnership and train a set of employees of the carrier or a set of drivers who are going to be delivering in a particular zone about the brand and all the products that they carry. And that is something that we have seen. And much earlier, even before the pandemic situation arose, there were companies, especially in the postal area, who were diversifying their businesses to be the last mile delivery partners of brands and retailers in certain localities. And they had used a similar mechanism of training a part of their staff, the delivery staff, the postmen, etc., on specific brands and retailers with dedicated partnerships. So I think those would be a few things that might be tried out this year.
Great. Thank you, Indu. We have another question from the audience. So CPG companies, direct to consumer, is usually about setting up the e-commerce channel with fulfillment left to retailers. But the question is, have we seen any CPG companies thinking of getting into the fulfillment as well? Is that something you guys are seeing? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I think it depends on the subsegment of CPG or retail. So for example, we've seen this for some time already in the apparel segment. So companies like Columbia Sportswear, Levi's, Nike, that are the manufacturers and are wholesale sellers to other retailers. At the same time, they do have direct-to-consumer channels that they fulfill themselves. Now, at the same time, those are brands that also have storefronts, right? And those storefronts, for some of those brands, really are about product ambassador, flagship type stores. So there's an example of where it's already been happening. I think for other elements of CPG, it really is going to depend on whether they have enough of an assortment or they have something that really warrants them pushing that direct channel themselves. Because to invest in that goes well beyond just having a fulfillment capability, right? It's all about, how do I take the order? How do I make sure the order's appropriately captured, fulfilled? How do I handle the returns, right? So there's a lot that goes into building that whole channel of direct consumer out. So I think before some of these other traditional CPG brands go there, there has to be enough of a momentum and enough of a reason for them to go there. But I think they can look at the apparel space as one space where it's worked successfully and say, how could we replicate that once we hit that point where it makes sense?
Thanks, Andrew. Azal, Indu, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I have observed that this is attacked by the CPG companies depending on the geography. It may not be that one particular strategy applies and works in every geography. For example, Asia Pacific, there the local delivery companies enter into partnerships and provide dedicated fulfillment of orders for the CPG companies. We have seen a lot of such partnerships coming up in specific areas. If I take India as a country, it is not that a particular CPG company would have partnership with a last mile delivery or a crowdsourcing provider in every other location. It would depend on the specific zone where they are trying to provide a partnership and where they think that this particular partner is successful. So I've seen this trend varying according to the zones that they operate in and the geographies.
Great, thanks, Indu. Azal, do you have anything to add, or should we move to the next question?
I think there are some more audience questions. We can probably move on.
Great. So one of them is in physical stores, there's a lot of focus on getting shelf space. What kind of challenges will brands face in e-commerce merchandising and merchandising, I suppose, also in the retail stores, but also online? Maybe you could answer that a bit from the retail perspective on what are the challenges typically, and then I'd like to move to Andrew and get his thoughts as well.
Absolutely. I think, see, if you look at it, as we move more towards the online shopping from the physical stores, and also we briefly talked about the marketplaces getting, much of the attention where the consumers are able to see a lot more products and availability, it is going to become extremely difficult for the uh, brands and the products to get listed there, right? So you, the search algorithm and your product ranking of your results is going to play a vital role, and the companies will be definitely competing for that, right? Now, for example, if you want a particular search for a particular product, gone are the days where you start your search on Google. Probably you are starting your search on Amazon, and which product is getting displayed first and which one is going to be displayed later, that is going to be some of the algorithms which needs to be where the companies will be competing so that their product comes up in the top of their search, right? That is what is going to be driving the complexity for some of these brands as they go into the marketplaces and the online e-commerce. There will be a rush to get their product listed. Search engine optimization, online advertisements, and the micro marketing spend analysis, all of this will become very very important for the brands to get their product out there in the e-commerce world.
Andrew, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I've got a couple of quick thoughts to share. You can see there's no shortage of thoughts I have. But, a couple of things I'd like to say. One thing, can you imagine if you were in a physical store and you stopped at a certain item that you saw, maybe it was on an end cap, maybe it was in a certain aisle, and you said, boy, that looks interesting, I like that. And then as you turned around to go to the next aisle, it had even better products that you liked. And then you turned around again and even better products, right? That the merchandising assortment kept dynamically changing based on your preferences, right? Based on where you were spending your time. Well, that's the opportunity that exists online, right? As retailers and companies are able to capture that, what we call digital exhaust of what am I looking at? What am I typing into the search bar? Where am I spending more time? That they can dynamically serve up products and pages that get better and better as my experience goes on. That's the challenge for online merchants, is to really figure out, how do I create that world, right? How do I use that digital exhaust data to continuously improve the merchandising and what I'm serving up to that consumer? Now, secondly, one thing we haven't even touched on is AR and VR, right? AR and VR are now here, right? We're seeing the HoloLens, we're seeing all these different forms of that show up in reality. And now, how does that start to build in? So how do I look at products in my home in context? So not just looking at them on the screen in front of me, but bringing that to life in the home via AR and VR. That's an area that I see investment in going forward in this year, and really looking at, how do I make that experience real and bring to life the shopping experience from my home.
Thanks, Andrew. Thinking about this whole digital merchandising versus retail merchandising, Aizil mentioned Amazon and such. Amazon's been sort of pushing forward with its physical stores over this period, hasn't it? Any thoughts on the success of that, or the model, and whether that will change the game for the market?
See, I think that will continue to evolve, right? I think there is that 4-star store shop by Amazon has been a great one. Where you get all the 4-star products in the store, and the Amazon Go kind of an experience, which is also liked by the consumers. I think it will continue to evolve and to continue to, and under there, of course, the Whole Foods acquisition, and it is going to definitely make a difference, and it will make a further progress in the market. See, think about it. Even in this kind of difficult retail environment, Five Below has opened their 1,000th store in North America, and they have been very successful, and they are able to continue to make progress in the physical store opening. So I think it's a combination of your online and physical stores will continue to be there, and the physical store strategy used by some of these online retailers will continue to be making progress in 2021.
Yeah. And Indus, sorry, did you have a point to add to that? No. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. So we have another audience question asking about subscription models. It says many product companies have moved from product to subscription-based models. Are there ways where printer copier companies as well will move to such models? And I suppose I would interpret this question in as such as, what is it about the subscription model that works, in CPG these days versus, in maybe other manufacturing companies. Perhaps, I don't know if you'd like to have a stab at that, Ezil or Andrew or Indu.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing quite a bit of looking around the subscription model and researching about it. The subscription models are becoming a annuity business which the retailers are really enjoying about. Right, there will be subscription models being launched for many product categories. Printers and copier papers definitely will be one of them, and I don't see why that will not be possible. See, even other areas, think about even fuel consumptions. Can you buy a subscription model for your gas purchases? Can you do a subscription model for there is a great example of the Dollar Shaving Club, which picked up. Nobody thought that it can be possible, and they came up with that. And likewise, I think more and more product categories, even in areas where you have never thought about, will come into subscription model. Rent the runway business, right? That's about designer clothes which is being given on a subscription model. And the Stitch Fix, we know about that already and how successful they are in this business. I feel that the subscription model will be a very important thing which all the retailers have to take a note of it. All the CPG companies have to take a note of it and see how that might fit in their business, immaterial of which kind of product category they are dealing with.
Great. Thank you, Ezil. We're coming up to time now at the end. Any final comments from the panel? If you were to give one word, apart from revenge shopping, each, what would you say that is going to define FY21, FY22 for your areas, for logistics, retail, and CPG? I'll give you a second to think about it. In the meantime, I'll ask all the audience, thank you so much for joining us for this first Spotlight on the Consumer live webinar. We're going to do this quarterly, so please do look out for us communicating about the next one that comes out. We look forward to seeing you. Before we end, again, I'll pass to our panel and I'll ask for their single word. Indu, please. I'll put you on the spot first.
Convenience.
Convenience. Great. Andrew?
I'd say resilience.
Perfect. Thank you. And Ezil?
I think it's going to be consumer.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks for your great insights, and look forward to seeing you again when we do this next quarter. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.